Good afternoon. We will begin today with the Refuge and Bodhicitta prayer as usual. O sangye chedan soye chonam la chancho bardo dane chabsum je dage jinso gibe sunam je Drola penjir sanje drobar sho sangye chedan soge chonam la chancho bardo dane chabsum she dage jinso gibe sunam je Drola penjir sanje drobar sho sangye chedan soge chonam la chancho bardo dane chabsum che dage jinso gibe sunam je drola penjir Sanje drobar sho simje damje dewa tang dewe judan dembar jurche donga da donga je judan rawa jurche donga mebe dewa tampa tam mindralwa jurche Nyeren shada nitan dralve tanyon shembola nebrajurche. In the Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishta is the essence of all Buddhas. Of the three times who shows me directly in my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious exalted Gurus. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. And so now as we begin, please think to yourself that we must bring all of our mothers, all sentient beings, to the state of freedom from suffering. Suffering is painful. Our own suffering is painful for us because it is by nature suffering. And when we have compassion for other sentient beings, their suffering is suffering for them, and it is also painful for us because it is by nature suffering. And so for that reason, if we want to truly free sentient beings from suffering, we need to bring them to the state of completely perfect Buddhahood, and in order to do that, we ourselves must achieve Buddhahood, either first or along with them, but we have to work at it ourselves. And in order to achieve Buddhahood, we have to engage in listening, contemplating, and meditating upon the Dharma. And so with this motivation, please listen to the Dharma this afternoon. The Dharma we are listening to is the verses on the Treasury of Abhidharma by Vasubandhu, as explained by the Ninth Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje in his commentary on the verses called Youthful Play. Within the commentary on Abhidharma, the verses of Abhidharma, there are 8 chapters, and we have come to the 4th chapter, the 4th area, I should say. They're officially called areas. And this 4th area is teachings on karma. And teachings on karma, this section has 3 main topics. How everything arises from karma, that is just the very first line. From karma, various worlds are born. And then there is the teaching on understanding karma itself. And then there is teaching the synonyms of dharmas as a summary. And so we are in the second, the topic on understanding karma itself, and this is 3 topics: identifying karma, the presentation of karma, and the meaning of karma as explained in the sutra. Sutra. So the presentation of karmas is what we spoke about, what we started speaking about yesterday. Well, we spoke about we covered that already, but just to review what it is, this is where we're talking about the different types of karma. Volition and what that creates. Volition is mental karma, which creates the karma of body and speech. So we've got two types of karma, basically. We've got karma of mind, mental karma, which is volition, wanting to do something. Then we've got intended karma. So intended karma are those actions of body and speech that are motivated by the volition, right? So that's intended karma. And then intended karma. So in that way we look at karma, we have two, volitional and intended karma. And then with the intended karma, we can say, well, there's karma of body and karma of speech. So in this way we could say there are three types of karma: mental karma, bodily karma, and karma of speech, these three. But even with these latter two, there are two different types of karma. There is the perceptible karma, which is the karmas that we can, or the actions that we can see or perceive. And when we perceive them, we are able to sort of distinguish the intention of the person who's performing the action. Sort of is kind of, you have to say sort of there. You have to modify a little bit. We can't necessarily see the intention, but you can make a good guess. When you see someone getting ready to wring the head off of a chicken, you know that they've got a malicious intent or a greedy intent. When you see someone making a prostration, you've got a pretty good idea that that person has a virtuous intent. There's no guarantee either way, but you can generally tell. So since you can generally tell what the intention is by looking or by perceiving an action, then we can say that the intention is perceptible. So that's why it's called perceptible karma. Other translations call it either informative karma or indicative karma, both of which are fine. But the point is that you can sort of get an idea about the intention of it, so that's informative. But then there is the imperceptible karma, which the other translations also call uninformative or unindicative. And here with this, what this basically means is, to keep it simple, not entirely accurate, and we'll get into that, vows. It's when you have a commitment either to do something or a commitment to not do something. When you have a commitment to do something, when someone is making that commitment, at that very first moment when they're making the commitment and they are saying, I promise to never kill again. I promise, because this is Sagadawa, the fourth Tibetan month, this is the first day of Sagadawa, I promise to give it up eating marase, red food, meat and eggs for the month of Sagadawa, so from now for 30 days. This, by the way, is a very common practice among Tibetans, and I should have mentioned it yesterday, but that's no matter. You can start now if you are interested in doing it. This is according to the Tibetan calendar, this is the month that is the anniversary of the Buddha's birth, passing into parinirvana and enlightenment. So it's very common, because it's a very auspicious month, it's common for Tibetans and followers of Tibetan Buddhism to say for this lunar month that they're going to give up eating meat. That's the big one, because that's the best way to give up harming sentient beings. Eating eggs. Eggs used to always be considered meat. Now eggs come from factories, and they're usually not fertile. So they may not be meat themselves, but those chickens who are laying them, they have a pretty hard life. So they're eggs, so meat and eggs. In the Tibetan tradition, it doesn't usually include dairy, because the industrial systems of dairy farming that are very difficult for animals in this continent and in Europe are not common in Tibet or South Asia. So there they don't give up dairy, milk. But at any rate, if you give this up for a month, if you make the commitment, you think to yourself, I'm not going to eat this for this month. So from now until, I don't remember what day the last day of this month is. It's probably going to be around the 20th or the 21st of June. But until the next new moon. from now until the next new moon. At the moment you're making that promise, especially if you're saying it out loud, and if you're doing something kind of more elaborate, like bowing in front of a Buddha statue, kneeling and saying, I promise not to eat any meat or eggs from now until the next lunar month. When you are doing that act, someone can see you and they can determine what your thought is, right? When you are signing the dotted line on that contract to be enlisted in the military, you are making a commitment to be willing to kill because you're joining the military. So that is an example of a negative type of commitment. That first moment, you can see it. After that, you can't. Once you have the first moment when you make that vow not to eat meat or eggs during Sagadawa, you can see it. The second moment, no one can tell. Tomorrow, you're going to work, you're doing whatever you normally do, or you're staying inside for the lockdown. Whatever you're doing tomorrow, no one can tell from looking on the outside that you have the intention to give up meat and eggs for the next 30 days, right? So that's why it's called imperceptible. You can't distinguish. You can't tell anything about it from the outside, okay? So that's the imperceptible form. So these imperceptible forms are kind of tricky, and the part that we've got to in the text is talking primarily about imperceptible forms. So I think we need to kind of go back before we do this, because there's a small number of listeners compared to the number of listening. We had about 20 people in our class last year on Namo Buddha, and I don't even know if all of them are listening right now. I hope they are. But we have about 120 people who are listening regularly every day. And then there are more people who are kind of catching up. And so among those of you who are watching right now and who will be watching later, when we say imperceptible forms, your eyes are glazing over. You don't know what we're talking about. So I'm giving a little bit more explanation today. So here's the basic problem. The basic problem is it's easy to see that an action such as prostrating or killing, giving or lying. It's easy to see that these are actions you can see or hear. You can or if it's killing, you experience it with your senses until you are actually dead. So there are these. Or if you're killing, if you're engaged in the act, you can feel. I don't want to go there. But at any rate, you can tell. It's an action, you can see it. But when you take a vow, you've taken that vow. When you take the vow, okay, you can see that someone's taken the vow. But that vow, keeping that vow is said to be karma. So how is it karma? What is the nature of the vow? Now, some schools, in particular many Mahayana Buddhist schools, will say that actually a vow is your mind. This is what Shantideva says in the Way of the Bodhisattva. He says, discipline is taught to be transcendent from gaining the intent to abstain. So when you have that intention to abstain from killing, to abstain from stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and so forth, that intention that you have in your mind is the vow, they say. But then there's a problem, because sometimes when you're keeping a vow, now when you first take the vow, you're kind of gung-ho about it, it stays in your mind. But when you've had it for a little bit longer, it just becomes part of your normal life, and when it's part of your normal life, it's easy to forget about it. I mean, you could be brushing your teeth, and as you're brushing your teeth, you're thinking, did I get that spot on that molar over there? You're not thinking to yourself, I'm keeping the vow of not killing, are you? So how is it, so you're distracted, you're brushing your molars. How is there that vow at that time? That's the problem. So if it's mind, what is it? Because mind is not there when you're distracted, but vows are. It's taught that the vows, the moment that you have a vow, you keep the vow, it stays for the whole time. So the Great Exposition tradition is that actually vows are in some sense physical. They're forms. They're these imperceptible forms. So you take these vows, and at the moment you take these vows, then they are, then at that moment you can see them. And it's like you're doing something with your body and your speech, right? So you're doing a virtuous vow. Let's say you're taking the 5 lay precepts, or we could say, let's say you're since today's the first day of Sagadawa, let's say you're making the commitment to not eat meat and eggs until the next full moon. So you put out your Buddha statue, maybe you're going to put out a few flowers or something, and then you kneel down, you prostrate, and you join your palms, and you can just do it very simply, because this is not an official sort of vow. You just say, I promise, in the presence of all the Buddhas and all the Bodhisattvas, I promise not to eat meat from now until the full moon. Right? So you've made that promise, and that time that you're doing it, that vow starts at that time, and it's something physical. So what it's said is that at that moment, that vow, that physical thing that is your vow, that arises from your body and your speech, arises from the elements of your body and your speech. So it's made out of the 4 great sources. In this text, we call them sources. They're also, in English, we usually call them elements. And I'm not sure if this is something that needs to be changed in a future revision of this translation or not. But when you see, in this, as a side note, when you see the word sources here, you can think that they are synonyms for the 4 elements of earth, water, fire, and air. Okay? So sources, the reason for using the word sources is that there are different words in both Tibetan and Sanskrit for elements and sources, and so I wanted to match that. And the other is that the word elements has so many uses that if you use the same word elements, you can get all the uses of the word elements mixed up. So I thought it was clear, but I'm not certain that it actually is. At any rate, that's a different matter. So it comes out of the elements of your body when you're taking the vow. You make that commitment, I'm giving up meat from now until the next full moon. Meat and eggs now until the next full moon. Even if you just say meat until the next full moon, that's fine. If you don't give up eggs, that's fine. You do what you can. That's beside the point, though. Here, you're taking that. So you've made that commitment. Now that commitment, I'm giving it up until the next full moon. So this means once you've done that, now you've made that vow. So tonight, when you are brushing your teeth, you are still keeping that vow. When you fall asleep and you're in one of the mind-free moments of sleep, you still have the vow. You are still, in every single instant you are keeping that vow, you are performing the action of keeping that vow. It's a cheap way to gather a lot of merit. Because you don't have to do anything. It's the opposite. You just have to keep a promise, which means not doing something. It's easier to not do something than to do something. You have to be mindful. So you have to remember for the next month, no eggs. That's the hard one because there are eggs in so many different foods. Right, so no meat and no eggs. That's very difficult for the next month. So maybe just meat. It's okay. Whatever you decide for yourself. At any rate, you've made that vow. So when you're distracted, when you're in the mind-free moments, if during the next month you achieve the 4th dhyana and enter the absorption of cessation, then you also will be keeping, not the absorption of conception-free, you will also be keeping your vow while you're in the conception-free absorption, because it's physical. Okay? So that's it. It's during the distracted time. It's in the mind-free moments. Now, the other thing about these vows is that they're virtuous or they're unvirtuous. There are no neutral, imperceptible forms. If you are making the commitment, this will make your dentist very happy. I promise I will brush my teeth 3 times a day. It just doesn't quite rise to the level of being like it's not like a vow or the opposite of a vow, a wrong vow. So you've got vows and wrong vows, and mid-vows, but we'll get to those in a few weeks. At any rate, so you've got vows doing something virtuous, wrong vows committing to doing something unvirtuous. So, but we're talking about a virtuous thing. We're talking about taking this vow. So So your imperceptible forms are either going to be virtuous or unvirtuous. They're not going to be neutral. Committing to brush your teeth is just not going to rise to the level of a vow. I'm sorry. No matter how much your dentist might not like that. The other thing is that they're continuously there. Every moment, the vow is there. Continuously, always there. So and the last thing is that it arises from the great sources. It arises from the elements of your body and speech. Okay, so that's basically how we have it. Now, when you're taking vows, and for us it's more important, I mean, of course, the wrong vows and mid-vows are important, but what are really important for us are the vows, because they're a really good way to practice. They're an important part of Buddhist practice. So the vows are really important. But there are different ways that you can get vows. And when you're talking about the word for vow in Sanskrit, samvara, and in Tibetan, dompa. Dompa can mean to tie, to bind. In other words, vows are restraints. They're restraints on your action. The restraint from killing. The restraint from taking that which is not given. The restraint from sexual misconduct, or the restraint of practicing chaste conduct, etc., etc. These are the different types of restraints. Now, in translating this into English, everyone says vows, so we just say vows. But it's a little bit, the main point of it is different. Now, why this actually makes a little bit of significance is that there are other ways to gain vows than just by saying, I promise never to do this again. Another way to gain a vow is if you achieve the dhyana meditations. Once you gain the dhyana meditations, you no longer have any desire for anything in the desire realm, and so you no longer have any wish for, especially food and sex. Money goes along with both of those. And so, therefore, you're just not going to do anything unvirtuous. So you have a natural restraint from doing unvirtuous actions that comes out of the power of your meditation. So that is what we call a vow of dhyana. And another type of vow that can happen is when you when you see the nature of the Four Noble Truths, when you see that everything is impermanent, suffering, selfless, and empty, and you see that it comes from a cause, and that it comes from conditions. You see the origin, you see the production, and then you see all the qualities, the cessation and path. When you see the 16 characteristics of the Four Noble Truths, and at that point, you realize, boy, I'm never going to do anything wrong again. There's no way I'm going to kill because I know what's going to happen to me if I kill. There's no way I'm going to take anything that's not given because I'm just not going to. It's just out of the question. Just naturally arises. It's like, no way, I'm not going to do that. Because you see that the cause, that the temporary pleasure that you would get from doing that action is far outweighed by the ultimate consequences of performing it. So you get pleasure once, and in response, you get a long period of suffering. So then you see that. It's like once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. It's just right there. And so for that reason, when you achieve the noble status, you're never going to do anything wrong. It's like when the Buddha, when the Bodhisattva Siddhartha Gautama, so we're talking about the Great Exposition presentation, which is like the Theravada presentation, when Siddhartha Gautama was born, he was not yet a Buddha, according to this presentation, different than the Mahayana. So he was not yet a Buddha. He was a Bodhisattva. He hadn't even achieved the path of seeing. He hadn't become a noble being, but he naturally, because of his training, he wouldn't kill. In fact, he saved Devadatta's goose from being killed by Devadatta, right? All the stories. He didn't engage in sexual misconduct or in stealing or so forth. He lived. Why? Because he had this natural restraint. So these are the different types of vows. They're not necessarily just ones that you promise and take. However, for our intents and purposes, they're primarily the ones that we take. And for most of you listening, they are going to be the For example, the 5 lay precepts or the 5 lay precepts of chastity, or perhaps some of you may have the monastic vows. Those are the primary level of vows, the pratimoksha vows, okay? The vows of individual liberation. Now, these vows, in the Tibetan practice, of course, we also talk about bodhisattva vows, and we talk about tantric vows, but here we're talking about the vows of individual liberation primarily, okay? So we're not going to go, the bodhisattva vows and tantric vows are different, so just put them aside for the time being. Don't worry about them. So when we think about it, this great exposition idea of there being an imperceptible form on a certain level makes a lot of sense. Because if it's just something in your mind, if the vow is just something in your mind, then it's easy to forget. How are you gaining merit when you are asleep? If you have the imperceptible form, then that imperceptible form, in other words, that imperceptible action that's happening every moment of keeping your vow, then that is like the action that's gaining you merit in every moment. So that's every 13 milliseconds, according to the Treasury of Abhidharma. So for that reason, there's a lot of sense to this, that makes a lot of sense to this, but it's a difficult one to understand, especially since we can't really identify exactly what is that imperceptible form. What is it? So you take the vow, you've got a new imperceptible physical form. If you got on a scale and weighed yourself, would you weigh any more or less? Probably not. So this form, imperceptible form, is said to be unobstructive. It's not one that you can perceive with any of the senses. It's included among the 12 sense bases, that is the 12 ayatanas, this 12 sense bases. It's not included in any of the 5 external objects. It's not any of the 5 internal faculties. It's not mind. It's considered the sense base of dharmas, the objects of mind. It's not considered something. So it's not something that you can perceive with your sensory faculties, and it is not the sensory faculties either. So it's difficult to actually find it. There are some presentations that talk about it as being actually exactly the same as the elements in your body. Because right now, you could say, well, okay, I'm keeping the vow. It's like when, let's take an example. We were talking about the bodily perceptible as shape, it says, right? So when you're doing a bodily perceptible action, like a prostration, you can see that. It's a shape that you see. It's a form, right? So similarly, the imperceptible form, it's like the elements that make, one explanation is it's the elements that make up your body as you're sitting there keeping the vow. Right now, if you have the vows and you're sitting there, your body is keeping the vows in your speech. So that's one way of looking at it. Other scholars, though, say, no, it can't be that, because it says that the imperceptible form is unobstructive, and the body is not unobstructive. Therefore, it has to be something else. Well, what is it? That's a very interesting point. And because it's so difficult to identify what it is, other schools dispute the idea that there is an imperceptible form. Okay? So that's the basic idea. So here in the Treasury of the Abhidharma, which is taught from the perspective of the great exposition mostly, we say there are imperceptible forms. From the perceptive of the Sutra school, we say, oh man, perceptible forms, give me a break. What a crazy idea. In terms of current Tibetan practice, some of the Tibetan schools say, yes, there are imperceptible forms, and some don't. Even with within some schools, some say, well, yes, and some say, well, no. In our Karma Kaju school, we generally say that the pratimoksha vows, the vows of individual liberation, have the imperceptible forms, that it's a reasonable presentation. But there is the problem of we ordinary people can't see them. So that's the basic issue. So with that, I might as well start in on the text, now that we've had that introduction. I just want to make sure, because this is kind of a difficult idea, and I think if you have an overview of the idea first, then it is easier to understand what is going on when we actually look at the text. That being said, in particular, the first few pages of the text, probably all the text that we will cover today, is very technical. And so because it's very technical, I kind of went heavy on the technical stuff yesterday. I might not go so heavy on it. I think the main points are what I just sort of explained in my general discussion. If you keep those points in mind, if you think about that, that is going to be, I think, appropriate for you right now. If, on the other hand, you are someone who has studied a bit of Abhidharma before, then it's good to go into the detail. Okay? So we're on the page 296, when about 3/5 of the way down the page, it says imperceptible forms. It says 2 topics: proof they exist substantially, and second, presentation of their features. So the first is proof they exist substantially. So here, the reason why this topic is here is we are about to talk about imperceptible forms, and some schools don't accept them, so therefore we need to give the proof why there must be imperceptible forms. So in typical, concise Sanskrit style, it says 3 kinds in stainless form are taught increase and paths not done, etc. So very clear. It's basically just a list. It's basically saying here, the Buddha taught in sutras that there are 3 kinds of form. And he taught in another sutra that there is stainless form, and that stainless form has to be the imperceptible form. Stainless meaning undefiled. He taught that when you do certain types of merit, the material merits or immaterial merits, that increases the merit. And if it's going to increase the merit, that's only logical if you have an imperceptible form. And the second is paths not done. Paths not done means the karmic paths that you did not actually do yourself, but you had someone else do. And that could only work out if you have an imperceptible form, and etc. refers to everything else that proves this that we didn't just mention specifically. Okay? So the Sutra school, here's the dispute. The Sutra school says that imperceptible forms do not substantially exist. In other words, they're not really real. If you like it as an idea, fine, but if you say it's real, that's a problem. This is because they are merely promises not to do something anymore from this time forward until forfeited. That is, forfeited means the time that you lose the vow, or the time that the vow ends. So forfeiting the vows, like when you make the commitment, I am not going to eat meat or eggs from now until the next full moon, then when the next full moon is over on the day of the first day of the 5th Tibetan month, then that vow automatically is forfeited. Okay? When you make the pratimoksha vow, I am going to hold the 5 lay precepts from now until death. When you die, it's forfeited, and so forth. There are other causes of forfeiting vows that we will discuss later. And so they're merely given the label imperceptible form. So you give them the name. We make this promise, and you give it the name in imperceptible form, but there's not really anything there. Because they're designated based upon the past sources, but the past sources do not exist in essence. So they're the past elements of earth, water, fire, and air, that we are giving the name imperceptible form, but those past sources are past. They don't exist. So how can they be anything really? And because they do not fill the characteristics of form. The characteristic of form is that it's subject to decay, subject to disintegrating and falling apart and so forth. And how does that happen? I mean, they don't even exist. How does nothing decay? So that's the Sutra school. Now the Great Exposition, they're the ones who are saying, yes, there are. They say, well, here is the proof. And with proofs, generally we can talk about logical proofs and scriptural proofs. So here we're first starting out with scriptural proofs. The Great Exposition School says that imperceptible forms exist substantially. As a proof of this, a sutra says, the three types of form include all forms. There is form that is showable and obstructive. There is also form that is not showable but is obstructive. There is also form that is neither showable nor obstructive. So showable form basically means ones that you can point at and you can say, that is showable, right? Or a sound. Did you hear that sound? Or a scent. Do you smell that? Right? Those are showable. So they're forms that you can show, and that are obstructive, like this. Then there are forms that you can't show, but are obstructive, like if you smell cooking gas, for example. You smell it, but you can't show it. So because you can smell it, it must be obstructive because it's affecting the nose sense, right? Then there's also form which is neither showable nor obstructive. And if you say that there's form that's neither showable or obstructive, what is that form if it is not imperceptible form? So because the Buddha taught that in a sutra, therefore there must be imperceptible form. Now, the second quotation from the sutra is that, so here it's saying, this Wangchuk Dorje says, thus imperceptible forms exist because three kinds of form are taught. Another sutra, a sutra also says, these forms for which greed or anger do not arise are called undefiled dharmas. Now, actually, as I was studying today, I realized that this is not actually a literal quote from the sutra. It's a little bit longer. It's like those forms and feelings and everything up to consciousness that for which greed or anger do not arise are called undefiled dharmas. But it clearly says that there are undefiled forms. So something undefiled, basically in the Great Exposition School, it means either something that's non-composite, which means either space or the two cessations, the analytic cessation or non-analytic cessation, which is going right over everyone's head who wasn't in last year's class. And then you also have the truth of the path. So it's not any of these non-composites. Form is not non-composite, but so that can't be so it has to be the truth of the path, but the truth of the path is the mind. Right? It's the wisdom of seeing. It's not a physical form. Your body is always defiled, according to the Great Exposition School. So that defiled form can't be your body or any other obstructive form. Therefore, it can only be the form of an undefiled vow. Remember we talked about an undefiled vow. When you see the truth of the path, you automatically refrain from harm. That's a vow. So it's also an imperceptible form, and that's undefiled. So therefore, that is proof of there being stainless form or undefiled form. Thus, it is also proven that there is imperceptible form because stainless or undefiled form is taught. And without imperceptible forms, it would not be logical for there to be such forms. What else could it be? It's not your body. It's not something external. Those are all defiled. There's no other form that could be undefiled. Now, the sutras also talk about 7 material merits or the 7 immaterial merits. If it is one of the 7 material merits or the 7 immaterial merits, the merit increases greatly. In other words, there are certain actions that if you do, the merit is just continues to grow greatly. And so here they're given in very short form. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go in them in too much detail right now. The 7 material merits are to give a monastery. Actually, it shouldn't necessarily be monastery. It should actually be like the grounds of a monastery. To give land for a monastery, essentially, or to build a temple, to give a bed to someone who needs it, or to feed someone, to give sustenance continuously, if someone is coming through, a passing guest, if someone is coming through, if you take care of them for a night or two, nursing for the sick, or being generosity in times of darkness. So right now we are in a time of darkness, a time of a pandemic, and if you are generous in a time like this is a material generosity that has a special virtue. So those have the material merits. To hear he dwells or else or plans to come or else has embarked upon the road or arrived. So he refers to the Buddha or to one of the Buddha's great disciples. And even though it says he, it could be one of the great female disciples. So here he is used as used in an inclusive sense. To see him, that is the Buddha or the great disciple, to hear the Dharma, to hold basic precepts, if these should make true faith and joy arise, these are the 7 immaterial merits. So these are great types of merits. And so if there were no imperceptible form, it would not be reasonable for these to be especially merit, for them to have extra merit. And then there's also the line, the paths not done in the route. So that's explained in the next paragraph. Additionally, it would follow that the karmic paths not done by oneself, but that one incites other to do, would not exist because there is no imperceptible form. So, for example, now here this is not going to be so much with the virtuous actions, but if you if you've made a vow to be a soldier, and you get promoted to be an officer, and then you command people to go and kill people over in another place. They're killing on your behalf. So that is part of your imperceptible vow. So that path that you have not, that karmic path of beginning, of the karmic path, meaning the way that leads you to actually the actual action, is not something you have completed yourself, but you still get the karma for it. And so then the phrase etc. means that imperceptible forms exist also because it is taught that there is form in the sense base of dharmas, right? We talked about that in the first chapter last year. Because the Eightfold Noble Path is taught. In the Eightfold Noble Path, we've got such things as right livelihood, right livelihood, right karmic, right action. So those mean, like right livelihood means practicing good livelihood, giving up livelihood like being a soldier, a butcher, a prostitute, or whatever. And then right action means giving up bad action, right? So those are also, those would not be logical without imperceptible form. And because it is taught that vows obstruct immorality like a dike and water. So like when you have a dike, it holds the water back. Like here in Richmond, and many of you are in the local area, we have the dikes that hold the sea from coming in and flooding this land, because otherwise this monastery would be very wet if there were not dikes, right? And the Vancouver airport would be flooded too, probably. All the dikes keep the water. So in the same way as a dike keeps the water from flowing onto the land, we also have the vows that prevent immorality. And so it makes sense for them to be physical form. Otherwise, they couldn't do anything. And then the Great Exposition says, there are many additional proofs. We're not going to say them all. So imperceptible form is proven to exist. And at this point, there are many refutations, presentations, and positions from others, including the Yogic action, that is the Yogacara, Sutra School, Darshtantika, earlier masters, the venerable elders of the Great Exposition, the master, and so forth. These all appear in the Tika. If you are interested, you can also read them in the in some detail in the auto commentary, in a little bit more detail in the Chim ornament of Abhidharma. Okay. So we're going to go a little bit more now. The next 2 pages of the text are fairly technical. And I think, again, as I said a few moments ago, if you keep in mind the main points that I said, first, this will make a little bit more sense. And second, it'll be more helpful to you. So I'm going to go through these very quickly. So if you don't completely get them right now, don't worry too much. This is pretty technical. The presentation of their features. This has 4 topics. the features of their cause, the features of their level, the features of their essence, and other attributes of their cause. So the cause of an imperceptible form is the material sources or elements that they're born from. So the features of the cause, this has 2 points. The attributes of the cause of the first moment is the first, and the second is the attributes of the cause of subsequent moments. So the first one reads, a small number of the present and future forms that act as causes arise from the past sources. In the first moment of an imperceptible form of desire, at the time of swearing a vow or so forth, the sources of the basis and the sources of the support are both co-emergent sources of the present imperceptible. So what does this mean? What this means is that at the very first moment you're taking the vow, you are in, let's say you're taking the lay precepts. At that moment when the master snaps his fingers and you take that, you receive that vow and you think to yourself, I've taken the vow. That's snapping the finger. At that moment, the elements of earth, water, fire, air in your body and the act as the co-emergent causes, that is, they are causes that are simultaneous. That moment, you have the first moment of your imperceptible form, snap, and form simultaneous. And simultaneous with that, there's earth, water, fire, and air. And so those elements of earth, water, fire, and air are simultaneous. So they're present sources. Okay? And then there are also the past sources of your body and so forth that act as a support. In subsequent moments, the impercepts of desire are born from the past sources. So in following moments, that is, from the various snap in the first moment, the second moment, that is 13 milliseconds later, it's the past, because it's no longer the earth, water, fire, and air at the same moment as you take the vow. It's those from the previous moment. So in the subsequent moments, the imperceptible forms of desire are born from the sources of the basis and past sources and the present sources of the bodily support. So it's like here, so you've got the past and present, but the main ones are the past there. So it's like the example as it's given, if you're pushing a wheel. So let's imagine you're pushing a wheel with your hand along the road or along the ground. Your hand is pushing the wheel. That's like the past sources. They're kind of like a basis for it, because without that push from the hand, there'd be no motion. So that push from your hand is the basis for the motion. Those are like the past sources, pushing from behind. And then underneath that wheel at the same point, there's the ground. And that ground is like the support that's holding it up. If there were no ground there, then it would just fall down into, where would it fall down into? If you rolled it off a cliff, it would fall down, right? So you have to have the ground underneath it to support it. So that's what the present sources, that is the earth, water, fire, and air of your body now do for it. The next topic speaks about the features of their level. So when we speak about levels here, as in much of the Abhidharma, we're talking about the levels of meditation, either in the desire realm where you haven't really got any meditation, or on the 4 levels of dhyana or the 4 levels of formless. So when you take the vows, what level are they on? Stained karmas of the body and speech take their own sources as a cause. So when you're talking about stained and defiled are synonymous throughout this. So when you see the word stain, you think defiled. And when you think defiled, you think anything that you could feel an affliction toward. So the stained, the defiled actions of body and speech take their own sources. The sources of which level function as their cause, you ask? The imperceptible forms of stained or defiled karmas of the body and speech from the desire realm up to the 4th jhana take their own level sources as a cause. So that is, when you are taking a vow in the desire realm, that means that the earth, water, fire, and air of the desire realm is the cause of it. When you are doing it in the form, if you're on the 1st level of form, it's the earth, water, fire, and air of the 1st level of form, and so forth, all the way up to the 4th level of form. There are no vows in the formless realm. because there's no form. Then the undefiled vows, because we talked about undefiled vows, right? So what levels, because undefiled vows aren't really on any level. Undefiled vows are actually the antidote for all of the levels. They're not on any level. So what, but they have a form, so they come from some form as their basis. So what is that? And it's, as it says here, the attributes on the undefiled levels, the undefiled of where it arises. The undefiled vow, this is basically saying, the undefiled takes the sources of the level where it arises. So undefiled forms take the four sources, the earth, water, fire, and air, of the support of the level where they arise. So that means, basically, if you're in desire realm, they take desire realm. If you're in the form realm, they take form realm. If the undefiled realm is attained on the support of a desire realm body, its great sources, that is, the earth, water, fire, and air, must also arise or originate out of the sources of the desire realm. So, for example, you are sitting here doing meditation. You do your meditation, you've got pretty good meditation, so you're on the level of like the preparations for the jhanas, but you're not actually there. But you have enough meditation that you can see the first noble truth. And once you see the first, then you're going to see the second, third, and fourth automatically. So you have that level of meditation. This is what we call the level of not unable. At this level, you're on the desire realm, and you see impermanence, suffering, empty, selfless. You see them. It's not just thinking them, it's like seeing them. At that moment, you gain that undefiled vow that I explained a few moments ago, right? So once you have seen that, there's like no way you're ever going to do any negative action again. There's just absolutely no way. You've got that restraint or that vow never to do it again. That vow has a form because you are still on the desire realm. That vow takes the earth, water, fire, and air of the desire realm as its cause. Okay? If the undefiled vow is attained on a support of the first jhana, its great sources must also be from the first jhana. So if your meditation is a little bit better, and you are and you've achieved the first jhana, but then in the first jhana you have really fine powers of consideration and examination. So if on that level there you see the truth, then it's the earth, water, fire, and air of the first jhana that acts as the cause for the sources. The features of their essence, impercepts, aren't appropriated. They are causally compatible and indicate a sentient being. What does this mean? To read the commentary. Imperceptible forms are unobstructive, so they are not appropriated. So appropriated, this is one of the wonderful things about the Abhidharma. There is one line in the first chapter that tells you what appropriated sources are. And then it's referred to like twice else in the other times in the book, including this one point. So appropriated sources mean the elements of earth, water, fire, and air that make up the body that has like your like sensory, that has the body faculty. So like your flesh, you can pinch your flesh. That's an appropriated source because you can feel it. You know, if you whack your bones, you can feel it. If you had hair, I have to use my body hair. Your hair is not appropriated because you can cut or do anything to it, and you don't feel anything, right? So it's those things that basically any part of your body where you feel sensation. And as they're always virtuous or unvirtuous, it is impossible for them to be virtue. Therefore, since they cannot be neutral. And because they cannot be neutral, they don't arise from full ripening. They're not the result of karma. They're not produced by development. By implication, they're produced by compatible causes. In other words, the imperceptible forms are made up of earth, water, fire, and air that are essentially similar to the earth, water, and fire, and air of the moment when you took it. So at that moment, you were doing a virtuous action, so they're virtuous, or you're doing an unvirtuous action, so they're unvirtuous. You're on the desire realm, for example, so they're on the same desire realm. Or you're on the fourth dhyana, they're on the fourth dhyana. It doesn't matter, they're on the same level, the same quality as the cause. So they're compatible with the cause, they're like the cause. They indicate a sentient being because they're included within the continuum of one. So if you can find, it's kind of hard since they're imperceptible, but if you could say that's an imperceptible form, you can only find it within the continuum of a sentient being. So that's what it means here by saying they indicate a sentient being. And other attributes of their cause. This has 2 points. The attributes of the causes of imperceptible forms of desire. They arise from sources which must be compatible appropriated. They, that is, imperceptibles of desire, arise from the cause, the great sources, earth, water, fire, and air, and the continuum of the assemblage of the body, which must be causally compatible and appropriated. So that is, your body is always, the earth, water, fire, and air in your body is always rising out of the earth, water, and fire and air of the previous moment of your body. And unless you happen to suddenly shift levels, they're going to be the same thing. And you don't suddenly shift levels. That's what happens when you die. So basically, when you take a vow now, that moment when the master, for the Pratimoksha vows, when the master snaps their fingers, that's the continuum of that sort. The elements are pretty much the same, and so they're appropriated because they're still part of your body at that point. The causes are, that is. Right? It's not like, so when you are taking the vow, it is your body and speech that is taking the vow. It is not your glasses case. Right? It is not the table, it is not the chair, it is your body. That's where the sources that are the cause of the vow come from. The attributes of the causes in the dhyanas and the undefiled levels, the ones born of samadhi, arise from unappropriated sources that are produced by development and are not separate. So here we're talking about the causes, that is the elements for the vows of dhyana and the vows, the undefiled vows, both of which arise from meditation or samadhi. Since they follow the mind, the ones born of samadhi, undefiled and dhyana vows, arise from the cause of unappropriated sources. So they don't arise from, because they come from your mind. They're mental vows. They arise out of the, it's different. It's not like the physical action of, repeating after your master and all that, and listening to the snap. It's like you achieve that level, and at that moment you get it, so it's following the mind. Because they're developed by samadhi, they are produced by development. So producing by development, things can be produced by development either by medicine, or by food, or by meditation. So these are produced by development. They are born from one set of four sources, as the producers of forces that produce all 7 different abandonments are not separate. So the 7 different abandonments means, like when you're talking about giving up killing, taking that which is not given, sexual misconduct, telling lies, what is it? The next one would be harsh speech, divisive speech, and idle chatter. So that's 7, isn't it? If I got it right. Those are the 7. When they come from the undefiled vow, you get it like all at once. It's not like separate actions of body and speech. When you're doing this as taking the Pratimoksha vows, for example, if you're taking the Bhikshu vows, then you get all 7 of those, but they're different in being actions of body and speech. They're 7 separate continuums of elements, whereas with the undefiled and dhyana-produced vows, because it's coming from the mind, then they're not differentiated. Here there are different assertions made by the Great Exposition and Sutra school and mind-only school. So that is the kind of technical aspect which we are sort of including for completeness here. The main thing to think about is, the main thing to have in mind, that's most important for us practically, is understanding that when you are doing an action, that action is form. Keeping the vows is an action. It's something you're doing. It's kind of this little active but inactive at the same time. So you've got this form of yourself that's keeping the vow. And that's the imperceptible form. So to remember that, and it's really important to kind of cherish it when you have the vow, to think about it. It's like thinking, even though it's not like that you can identify any vow, it's kind of thinking about it as being something that's there that you have to protect. You've got a form, and it's a precious form, a form of a vow, and you have to realize, oh, I don't want that to break literally. Right? I want to keep that form. It's a really important thing. So in some sense, when you're thinking of the vows in that respect, it helps you to keep the vows. You're thinking like, this is something precious. I'm treasuring it. There's something like tangible but imperceptible. Tangible but not tangible because you can't touch it. But it's something that's there nonetheless. There's this like imperceptible form of the vow. And also remembering that it's like this form that's with you, it's like all the time you are keeping the vow, that form is with you. The example Tranga Rinpoche gives is like if you have a cat that is asleep, curled up on a cushion in the sun. It looks so cute, and it is not killing any mice. But is that kitty keeping a vow of not killing? No. We know what that cat is going to do when it goes outside. If it finds a mouse, and if it finds another little critter, it'll eat that too. So it's not keeping a vow. But once you have taken one of the pratimoksha vows, the lay precepts or monastic vows, you've got it. You've got that form. You're sound asleep. And that form, that action, is still going on in every second. So it's like this incredible way to like just automatically gain merit without thinking. Distracted and mind-freed as well. So even if you enter the mind-free, conception-free absorption, you're still gathering the accumulation of merit with your body and speech. It's excellent. It's a cheap way to gather the accumulation of merit. And so it's a very powerful idea to think about. So that's the important thing to think. It's like this: the vows that we take are something that's important, something that we should treasure, something that has a basis in the physical somehow. And thinking in that way is kind of helpful in terms of just keeping and treasuring the vows. So that is enough for this morning, or this afternoon. So please let us dedicate the merit of this teaching and listening to the Dharma as representative of all the merit we have ever done, we or any other sentient being has ever done in this or any other lifetime, so that all sentient beings may be freed of temporarily of the ages of plague, famine, and war, and in particular now that they be freed of the suffering of pandemic, the actual suffering of illness and all the secondary sufferings that have come from it, and also that they may swiftly achieve the state of Buddhahood. Osanam de tam che se pani Tomne nye pedranam pamchene Kyegana che marla trombai Sibe tole drowa drolwa. Thank you.